Good afternoon. Well, I said in the chat this morning in Telegram that I would do a stream, and obviously I failed to do that, and I'm going out in about 45 minutes. So I thought I'd do a quick video, quick famous last words coming from me, but given I am really limited on time, just to run through really where we're at because people are freaking out, and rightly so. And then also because I want to update charts because like my charts are such a mess at the moment. Obviously everybody's saying we've broken down from this bear flag. I was asked earlier, why has this gone so fast? And my answer was, well, we did hit 3 months supply up here. There is that, and also the other things, we've got so many stops under here. So I put these weren't real entries, but I put them on here. They were the low time frame chart entries, not high time frame chart entries. I put them on here just to illustrate for the last stream. So we had a tiny bounce off the higher one. This was a 2-week demand. And now we've gone all the way through it pretty much. And then there was one here because there was a CME gap, which occasionally we get a bounce on, but not in this instance. Just hide that off the screen so it's a bit bigger. Yeah, so I'm unsurprised we got very little bounces on those two. And then this one was just finally for the higher low. So still looking at, okay, we might still get a higher low here. Obviously it's wicked deeper than expected or than hoped for. But we're just watching what the reaction is here. It could make a higher low. We could hold the bottom of this range. Below, as I've talked about before, but just to quickly remind that I've got a box here for the 113 to 127 fib if we get a failed wave. So by harmonics, you get this drop here that's 113, and then it goes straight back up through for the test and keeping going. This is not the best zone in the world. It is a 61 fib actually saying that. I don't know where that's from all the way at the bottom by the looks of it. So actually there is a 61 fib there. So I've got an alert right just, you can see the alert bearer just above that level. So looking at that 57 area, but 54 to 53, 54 to 57 for the failed wave. But like I say, we also looked for that here and didn't get it. We tried to bounce in that area, but then failed to go anywhere. So this could still drop lower. Below that, we're looking at the annual zone, which obviously is a very big zone. Historically, the annual zone has never been tested either, I believe. So yeah, so again, just see what happens when we get there. Just as a quick summary also of the high time frame, the high time frame, because of the freaking out, and this is stuff that I've talked about in the previous 2 videos. So hopefully you've watched those, and then you'll kind of know, oops, so it's better on the log scale. So the really high time frame, if the timelines follow, we would expect the bottom to be in October, so don't count your chickens yet. I have had reservations of this chart as a whole anyway. Like I said, we've never seen the grey zones here at the annuals, so this didn't quite touch it here. I can't say never, well, we didn't touch on this one lower and didn't come anywhere near it either, so interested to see what reaction we get here. I've said my reservations of this chart in general are that we had a very strong bull run in 2017, we had a reasonably strong bull run in 2020, and we've had a very weak, choppy one this time. And that would be my normal chart reservations. However, again, as you know, we've had ETFs, excuse me, some water. We've had ETFs come into the picture here and institutional involvement. So perhaps it's a good thing that we have these extended consolidations because that's while the big money is changing hands. Who knows? But, I do have reservations. If I was looking at this on anything else, I would have reservations that this was a very weak up move and that potentially we might correct a lot more than we have done historically. Bigger picture as well, like, we normally have an 80% drop. That would be obviously significantly lower than where we are now. We're still only at like 52%. I can see from the previous drop there, that percentage. And then down to the pink or the 61 fib here would be 72% drop. Yeah, obviously there is an opportunity to go lower. However, for the short term, we are looking at if we get down, we're still in a zone that could hold. We're still in a 3-month demand here. Failing getting a higher low here, potentially we could be looking at, the 46k, but again, it's a big zone. 61 fib comes in at 34k. So, but we just don't knife catch it. You don't need to, we generally have plenty of time. The one thing I wanted to particularly talk about though, and again, something I have talked about before, And I should have it on another chart, again, in the interest of time. Some fractals I've had from previous, I feel like it was on the Coinbase chart, yeah. So I won't go into the fractals in this again, just in the interest of time, but I have talked many times about thinking that when a lot of people were comparing this consolidation to this consolidation, I was slightly more reserved about it. And when I looked at it in more detail and what the structure had done here versus here, etc., I was more thinking that this would be equivalent to where we are now. Based on the previous structure. And like I say, you can watch previous videos to find out the detail of why I thought that. So again, I was unsurprised. So while we were looking for the possibility of a bounce in here in longs, because you can see there's a 2-week demand there, you can also see we had a 2-week, I think this might also be a 3-week demand here, and it just went straight back through it. It's weak demand, and in this case particularly weak. We've hit 3-month supply at the high. We didn't even make it up to the previous consolidation like this did. So just be a little careful here is all I can say. If we compare to lower time frame of what happened over here, let's just have a quick look at that. So arguably, and this came down actually a lot slower, it really tried a lot harder to make a higher low there. But arguably, we're around this point here, so this, had a few little bounces. Maybe we'll do something similar to this. But yeah, again, we're just seeing what the reaction is here. We haven't broken the bottom, we haven't broken the bottom of the range here yet, although it's perilously close. This does have a 3-month demand here. This did have a demand in there. I think it was I don't think it was, might have been monthly. I don't think it was a 3-month, that's for sure. Excuse me, let me just look quickly. It wasn't even a monthly in there. So we have higher time frame demand here, a lot more consolidation, but there's still, a lot of reservations I've got of what's going on here. So I'm just deleting some of that mess that I put there. Anyway, so that's Bitcoin. I will tomorrow go over this properly, and again, like I talked earlier again that in the Telegram channel about, when I have lots of crosses, the price is liable to go through all of them. The crosses being, in my case, I tend to always major zones. So in this case, we had 2-week demand here. I think there was a 5-day here, and the CME gap and 61 fib. I think there was some confluence in there, but because when I don't know where the price is going to bounce because demand isn't clear, then what I tend to find is that also the market doesn't know where support is, and therefore you find this is more likely to happen. So I guess on the plus side for that, it's sort of similar up here. We have many zones, and I haven't even got half of them marked up here that haven't been tested. So if we do hold and if the price goes up, that is at least a benefit that it could go up quite fast, similar to what we had over here. However, we still need to find the bottom, and I'm very skeptical as to whether that's in right now. But I guess we shall see. We are just looking at what the close is, looking if we make 2-weekly supply, etc. on this. What else? US dollar dominance obviously is doing the reciprocal of Bitcoin and is looking like it might want to break out. One of the reasons I wanted to look at all these more is because tether dominance is the one I normally use. As you can see, that's coming up to potentially breaking all-time high if we move a little more. But then we've got USDC dominance. And now I drew these lines, green, black, and red, back in when we were coming down here, so around first half of last year. And at that point, we were discussing it, and I was saying actually the green is the highest probability based on this structure. But the black would be the kind of, the more indecisive view, I guess, just the more ranging view. And then the red I thought was lowest probability at that point in time. And as you can see, we're sort of following the green at the moment. And we've got supply still a little bit higher. So this may not see the breakout that we would get on US dollar dominance if this moves further. And in fact, this is taken out. Take those out now. This has taken out that previous high there, whereas US tether hasn't. And similarly, I think stablecoin dominance, is in 3-month supply there, and even the aggregated charts, there's so many options here. And they're all just in different points in supply, with US tether Tether dominance being, I guess, the strongest one, although still in supply. I could still, I would never say long this now. Like people ask me, I mean, maybe if it longs come back into this consolidation, that's fine. But having said that, I don't think it's in a position to short either. We had hit 6 months demand down here. We had this inverse head and shoulders, and now we're broken out. So we're in a risk area if you were trading this chart itself. But it's something not to trade against anyway. I haven't, again, gone through all the crypto market cap charts in the last couple of days. The one thing I did observe yesterday, and this is just to do with alts because that's what I want to look at quickly now, in fact it's dropped even more now, is that obviously we had this massive drop. So we had an indecisive dominant Bitcoin dominance chart anyway. We were in 3 months supply. You can see there we closed below and came up and tested it. However, it went quite high inside. And broke through monthly supply, so it then flipped to monthly supply to monthly demand, but was still in 3 months. But as a result, it's come down quite heavily. So that was the area I was looking for a bounce if we were going to get one. But it's come down quite heavily, and now I've finally hit the zone I wanted down here, which is interesting. But what we had, we didn't actually have a reciprocal move in alts. Sorry, not reciprocal, a similar move in alts. So alts did the reciprocal. So alts have actually, the alt dominance, others dominance chart has actually kept going. So while Bitcoin's dropped a lot, alts haven't. And alts are very, very mixed, which is great because it's great for trading. Yeah, so we've got some that just look horrific, and a lot of the majors are like that. But then we've got a couple of others, even in the majors, like NEAR, for example, that is doing its own thing. TRX has been doing its own thing, but then dropped a lot yesterday. And yeah, I think NEAR's still holding. And then we've got, what else? BNB pumped, but then came straight back down again. Then we've got things like Hype, and a couple of the other smaller alts that I've just noticed and looked at, like Beat is sort of holding value. So alts are just all over the place. They could be either short or long still. There's nothing, we haven't got that easy market that we've had before where if Bitcoin drops, everything drops. And we haven't had this for quite a long time, but normally we would still get it when Bitcoin drops. Like you might not when Bitcoin goes up, then it's been quite mixed on alts, but normally when Bitcoin drops, you do see alts drop. And that hasn't really been the case. It's been very, very much, I think everything's quite red today, but we still are having some things hold, which is interesting. But as a result, you can see this others dominance is trying to break this range. It already had monthly demand and weekly demand in there. I can't remember if I've talked about this in previous videos or not. But anyway, it's by the by now. Obviously, it had a few wicks, you go back to the time frame, it had a few wicks into this area there that I was watching, but then it came back down to the weekly demand and then pushed up higher. Still got a bit of space. What doesn't really help though, and it doesn't really help my overall thesis either, is that even though others' dominance has gone up, others hasn't. So we're still very much just got alt money flowing inside alt money, or the market just staying flat here, where really what I still want to see is this fall off a cliff and come down into this area to look for longs, or even this area. I never wanted to look for longs and haven't for basically the better part of this year. And in fact, even coming down here, this to me wasn't an area for saying alt season. Yeah, there are always alts that you can look for longs on for sure, but to be able to blanket say, oh yeah, just buy all the alts, that hasn't been what I wanted to do. Anyway, here's a little bit difficult now as well. Like I said, we did have a bit of a push, but it's just very much sideways compared to that dominance chart, which has pumped. And really it's just pumped because alts are doing less badly than Bitcoin. Total DeFi dominance, we see exactly the same thing, but again, it's just come straight back up into supply, but this is obviously significantly stronger. So DeFi did get some, I think must have had some pumps. I guess Hype and things like that are included in here. I'm not sure the actual makeup of DeFi from a trading view perspective. But obviously this has had a decent move up over the last few days, or yeah, even maybe a week, 2 weeks. But similarly, total DeFi market cap is dropping. So again, we're seeing some alts holding their value against Bitcoin, but they're not really going anywhere significant in price terms. But they are just holding well, or maybe moving up a little bit against Bitcoin. And again, same as I've said before on the others chart, and this is obviously heading more the direction that I want. I wanted to see this down in at least 3 months demand down here somewhere, if not significantly lower based on the overall pattern. So as I've said before, you know, this could hold a higher low here and make a triangle, but equally it could break down and make a lower low. Anyway, yeah, so that's just a few observations, and like I say, I'll try and get back to this tomorrow so I can actually think about it some more. Ether, basically the same scenario as Bitcoin. So Ether, we did have, I was looking at Ether BTC in the last stream, and I did say it might get a bounce here because this was 61 fib, and also it was a weekly level from back over here. However, it wasn't an area that I wanted to look for longs at. I think it's a 61 linear fib, isn't there, not the log fib, and I still wanted it down here. So we did get a little pump on that a few days ago. When was that? The 1st, so on Monday. However, it was simply, again, it wasn't really indicative of Ether being strong. It was just indicative of Ether being slightly stronger than Bitcoin, and in fact wasn't really reflected on the Ether dominance chart. If you look at Ether dominance, it really just stayed sideways and then started dropping some more. So that's interesting. I don't know if that might just be to do with the calculation, because these charts are generally quite similar. So anyway, I was saying maybe we'd get a bottom when this hits monthly supply. So that's something to think about. Obviously, it hit daily supply in here, and then I think Ether dropped some more. And then we saw a temporary bottom, but obviously we've dropped more now, and this is just going sideways. But that, I think it's at the bottom. I need to think about that again. Trying to remember, like, and I need to look back at, for example, what happened here. You know, was this a top or a bottom on Bitcoin? I can't remember. But I think, you know, when we get the stronger moves in ETH BTC, it can help in determining, you know, where the top or bottom is on Bitcoin and Ether themselves. So again, I'll need to go back over that. It's just holding. It might make a little range here, so we just need to see, but be conscious of this. When it comes up, it made a new monthly supply in there. So when and if it makes it up to this level, then we'll be looking for some reaction on the rest of the market. Ether itself, much the same as Bitcoin. It's I think I deleted this zone because it's now run through this entirely. Could still swing fail here, could still hold that little local range. Obviously fell off the same trend line like Bitcoin did. Didn't hold the higher low that we were looking for on that. And then I've got this tenuous 5-day demand alert for there if it's going to hold a higher low. But again, my preference on Ether, again, if you follow my previous streams, are that, you know, we took out the high there, and that I think it's probably fairly likely we would take out the low here. Could be wrong, but that would be my particularly bearish thesis. On the bull side, you know, we are holding, well, we're not holding, we're just above this trend line here. We may hold that trend line, we may hold a higher low in here. We still have 3 months demand here that wasn't tested, so there's some optimistic things. However, the bigger picture for me is take out that high, take out that low, and then we've got a yearly level there and a 2-monthly level below. So don't be surprised if those hit at some stage. But for now, we're just watching what happens with the low of this range, and if this can like close as a swing failure or give us some structure here to look for any longs back from where we are right now. So like I say, so with Bitcoin and Ether, I think that the big things are, yeah, so I am bearish. I'm bearish. Actually, I probably shouldn't say that. I'm bearish on the mid time frames at the moment. You know, we're still following this downtrend that we've had since September, August last year. We're coming into areas that are unclear and are weak demands. So that would apply to both Bitcoin and Ether. They are not demands I particularly like. However, that makes it awkward, it makes it difficult, because I don't really want to short here. Obviously, you know, we're coming into some sort of, even if it's a giant area that we might get a bounce, we're coming into areas that we might look for longs, having had a decent move down. So I don't really want to short when we're coming into support. However, I don't also want to be blindly looking for longs here. Like we look for reactions and we get to zones always anyway. Yeah, so overall, like my macro on Ether, I guess is bearish, but obviously on Bitcoin it's bullish on those sort of high time frames. But but both are in just very large zones, so it's a little bit difficult. Anyway, I'll try and come back to this tomorrow. I'll clean my charts up a bit and see, what's happened overnight as well, and whether these lower zones are hit and or holding. Majors were really what I wanted to get to, because my charts have just got so messy, and I really need to look at these properly now, because I've just been for a long time just putting in little local entries as and when I see them, so I don't have enough of a good sense of the big picture. TRX we talked about in the last stream. It's hit that weekly zone that I said to keep an eye on. Keep an eye on it here for longs, but I was wary, and why it's a black cross, not a green one, is that we've got all these trend line stops here. But so at some stage I think it'll go for those, but whether it goes up and then does it, or whether it goes up and makes a higher high and then does it, or even just in the middle, is hard to say. Or it's just going to fall off a cliff now. I previously did put an alert back up here. I said in the last stream to look for if there was some supply in here. There's a 4-hour right at the top, but it's all a bit messy. I did have an alert here because it was the 61 fib of that original drop, but again, didn't get back up there. So yeah, I'm not sure about that anyway, but I'd potentially delete that or leave it there just to look for a lower high if we get a test in there. So that's TRX, but like I say, again, on this, I need to look at the bigger picture, and I need to look at where the BTC pair is as well. BCH has basically done what I said, what I thought it might, again, so I had some reticence for BCH. We have this, you can see the grey zone, we have this big annual zone. We also had a 3-month, I believe that's a 3-month demand in here. However, when we looked at the lower time frames, something again I've talked about in previous streams, we had all this chop going through here, and you can see I've got the trend line, and I said, while I was looking for longs potentially in the bigger zones as they were hit on this, there was a fair chance it was going to run through the trend line stops. And then similarly in the bigger picture, we are still lower highs, higher lows admittedly, but lower highs. And similarly to what I also said just about Bitcoin, I had a concern that this was strong, this was still strong, but lower high. And then this chop, from a weakness perspective, is this just a whole distribution pattern before the next leg down? And again, need to look at what the higher time frame's done on this. It has made a new 3-weekly supply. It hasn't bounced barely on any of these zones, and obviously now they've come into here. There's a few trend line stops there as well, so I did think, okay, maybe I'll put an entry or an alert in there just to see if we get a reaction around that 200 mark. Nice round number as well, but then again, failing that, we might end up all the way back down the bottom here. So it's as challenging as Bitcoin on this, but having said that, it looks like we have a 6-month demand here. So yeah, we're in a 6-month demand right now. It's hit already, and we've fallen deeper inside it. So maybe this will hold. And this is the dilemma I'm having across so many alts at the moment, that they are just, they're very, very conflicting TA. Anyway, quickly on to the next. Litecoin. Haven't had any longs on this for ages, so there's nothing new there. We'd had so many hits on this 2-month demand here that I thought this has got to break down this time. So this was one of the ones also, not many of the majors did much, but this one did make a 1-month supply. So I have put an alert in there. I already had a higher alert, so unfortunately none of these came back for my possible shorts. Could still be a swing failure into there, but weekly demand, but it's wicked through this. It's not a good zone. Indecision on the majors as well. So normally we would look at majors for confluence on when Bitcoin may or may not have bottomed out. And the confluence I'm just not seeing, but not necessarily because it's not there. I'm just not seeing it because it's not clear. Demands are not clear because of these situations of multiple hits. Like historically, majors have been like nice. They make demand or supply, and then when they all hit together, I can go great. It's a good place now for a decent size short on Bitcoin or ETH. But here it's just not clear. And again, not clear generally means something not great. Like that line doesn't need to be there. It's a weekly. Either way, that's Litecoin, so a next alert is significantly lower, but could swing fair at where it is now. Ripple, pretty much the same thing here, broken down the zone. It did make a monthly supply. Don't think it tapped it. Sorry, oh no, it did just tap into it. So I think I wouldn't have got the alert in there quick enough, but it tapped into it on the 1st on Monday and just came straight down. already had an alert up here for 2-day supply, but obviously it hasn't gone up to test that either. Ripple, much the same as Litecoin, could hold a higher low, could draw a trend line through there somehow, could hold this 3-day demand again, but my preference has always been lower on this as a yearly level and then 6 monthly levels down. So I, again, would like to see this break down lower before looking for longs on it, really. And, I could be completely wrong on these. Maybe they're just going to hold here in the range, and then we're going to see, that we've just done this nice chop through here, and it's just going to go like this through it. But if it does, that's fine. We might miss this, but we'll get this. So that's what we're looking for on all of these. However, the other option is that they continue to fall, and then we look at these lower zones that I've talked about. So moving on to the new majors. I've got about 10 minutes left max. So BNB basically did one of those ripple patterns that we love, where it had more of a flag than a triangle, where it ripples on a triangle, and it just went up, took out the highs, and came straight back through it. Unfortunately, and it also did actually flip. It had a monthly supply, and it kind of flipped it to a monthly demand. But you can see we've fallen very deep inside that. So we're now, so we're in a 3-day. I had an alert for the monthly, and then I had an alert for the 3-day inside it. So it's come into the 3-day. So again, I just need to see like BNB I wanted to be bullish on because of the 3-month demand at the lows, but then it was similar to BCH, like I wanted to be bullish on that. But the structure is very different to BCH, like at least this did make a higher high. But I want to still be bullish on this, so we shall see. But I really don't like that move it just did. Let's see, but we'll see what the close is like, see if this makes 2-weekly supply or something like that in there, in which case maybe we're going to be looking for longs back down here on annual demand. So that would be the next level. There's some wicks here, so somewhere around this area, retest of annual demand and potentially taking out some of those lows. We'll see. So that's BNB. Then Link, not dissimilar to Ripple, I guess. It has come also into this 3-month demand, which was a zone that I wanted to hit over here and over here, but didn't get hit until now. So again, decent area potentially to look for longs, except for that bigger picture structure, which is that this demand only made a lower high. So this is always the issue with supply and demand, is that you're going, okay, this is demand that's had a decent move off it, hasn't quite tested it there, tested it by, so it did have this decent moves that came when it came back to test this area, despite the fact it didn't even really get into it properly. However, all of those moves have been unable to break this supply. Now if we do hold here, whether it's the bottom that we've had already, the start of 2026, or whether we come a bit deeper, maybe then it's properly in demand and it will have enough demand to break that supply. I don't know, but it's the question. This one's a little bit more difficult because it's the fact whether you consider those to have actually tested this demand. So if the test has already happened, then demand is depleted. If the test hasn't happened yet, it could just take out those lows and then we get a really decent move off this. But again, another reason I want to look at the BTC pairs, because I want to see if that's supported. Because the other issue I have with this, similar to Ether and and I think Ether BTC, or some of the other, no, I think it's just the Ether chart, and the others chart, it's that this demand isn't strong, but we also have demand down here that wasn't quite tested. So are we going to come and take that low out, making this a zigzag correction before we then get a decent move out of a giant bull flag? But yeah, anyway, either way on this slightly difficult scenario, and I need to review and revise a lot of the previous crosses I've had on this, and particularly if we end up falling out of range, which I really hope we do, to be honest, because it becomes really painful when you stay in range too long. So I'm quite glad we've had a decent sized move. ADA I was bearish on, and again talked about in previous streams, like it had made a 3-week supply, and I looked for shorts. I think that was or maybe it was a weekly or 2-weekly early on, so we looked for shorts a little bit too early. I guess that was a weekly supply in the hope we'd fall down here, but then it came back in, went up higher, managed to get the short off the top. All the majors, actually, you may remember I talked about that had this weekly demand, so I set alerts to see if we got a bounce there. But I said again, I was wary, and in most cases they just either had a tiny bounce, maybe tradable, or in this case barely did anything and then just came straight back through. In this, also similar to Ripple, so we had, I think, Ripple, this, and Litecoin were the only three that made monthly supply, I believe, and I think DOT made a 3-week, but all the others, like, you know, are still holding that range. But as you can see, ADA's had the big drop that we were expecting. It is in 4-day demand here. My next alert was for weekly down there, and there's 3 weekly and then monthly, 2 monthly, and there's a whole host of untested zones in a large area down here. So again, don't knife catch. In fact, even down the bottom there, you know. Because if this does want to retrace that whole up move, it's still got a significant distance it could fall. But yeah, now coming into 4-day demand, so let's see what happens here. Who messaged me there? It's the person I'm meeting. Hopefully she'll say she's going to be late, but I've got 20 minutes now until I'm supposed to meet her. So that's ADA, again, as predicted a long time ago on this. So I hope you followed this and followed this through, you know, just... This is not to, well, partly to blow my own trumpet, but not necessarily to blow my own trumpet, more just, here we go, the prediction. Because I like to keep records and see, you know, whether you know, the assumptions I've made back in the past were valid or not, you know, because a lot of, particularly on these big picture assumptions, because yeah, it's nice to know, I guess, where you've made errors and where you haven't. So I tend to keep them. So this we looked at, okay, we had this big up move, then we had this very corrective move up here, and I think from here I was saying that we might get this maybe even earlier, that I was looking at this being corrective. It did happen. It was very hard to get into because we had such a mess going on here. I then said, okay, well, they'll expect a drop and that we would either looking for a triangle or we'd look for a zigzag correction, which would mean taking out that low. So obviously you can see that was the the more positive prediction, this being a giant bull flag or triangle in the making versus zigzag correction coming down. So obviously we've gone with that second option. But again, be conscious that this picture is quite similar across all the, find where it is, we can hide it again, it's quite similar across a lot of the charts, and what I talked about on others, you know, that this demand that we've had in the middle that comes off there is not necessarily a strong demand. It hasn't been able to break the high. So when it comes back to test here, yeah, we're trying to get some bounces, but we're not getting very far. So the expectation as we run through, and we might see a mix, we might see some of those charts hold this area, and maybe it depends a lot on what's happened over here, maybe even fundamentals, God forbid. But yeah, that's ADA. And then finally, Dogecoin, again, I think this is quite similar to, probably actually more to BNB, you know, it did manage to break the high of the range, but didn't really get to anywhere I particularly wanted a short, barely got any bounce to allow me to get back into a short either, and is now back on monthly demand. It's a monthly demand that's been hit 3 or 4 times, maybe this is more close to Litecoin actually, but even ADA, as I just described, you know, this is basically, as I just described, that similar pattern to ADA, that this could be a triangle here, or we could be looking for that same zigzag off a cliff into the next demand here or lower. So we need to consider those possibilities on this. Actually, that's terrible drawing, but you get the idea of what I'm saying from that bigger picture perspective. And again, so many levels above that haven't been tested. So great, you know, if this does hold, that would be really nice. So again, look at the BTC pairs on this, you know, that, you know, if we're going to hold here, BTC pair might help you decide whether this is actually going to be yet another bottom. In the BTC pair, you know, now is probably going to have pumped based on what that other's dominance chart's done. So you might see a pump on the BTC pair on this, but it'll be interesting to see where those are in relation to these charts to see if you can get the confluence for finding the bottoms. And then finally, new majors, the second layout of new majors. Let me just, I can't even hear what my friend said because she did a voice message. So she's going to have to wait. But anyway, I've got 10 minutes or so, so we'll try and finish this up quickly. So DOT, similar to ADA, one of the other few that's actually fallen out of the bottom of that range. It wasn't a good support anyway. We were looking for the possibility of longs when we came in here a while ago because it was the 61 fib. But, you know, really this is, and I think the BTC pair on this as well, like this is at all-time low. And we just got to a higher time frame chart. Yeah. So it's at all-time low. It's, you know, nothing really saying that this isn't going to continue dying forever. If anybody knows whether this has got some decent fundamentals that might make it recover, please let me know. I know people have talked about that in the past, but whether that's really a thing. I was saying earlier, so the only thing that I've really kind of gleaned on my limited knowledge of fundamentals is that if you're going to buy anything for a long-term hold, it should be an exchange coin. Because obviously hype is now taking off. Binance, the BNB coin, obviously is one of the strongest charts overall. TRX is not an exchange, but I don't even know what TRX does, but I guess that's a DeFi. But that seems to hold its value, maybe just purely because of Justin Sun. And I think even historically, I need to check them again, but the MEXC, can't remember the ticker now, MEXC and the BitGet charts, I think were holding really well. They might have died now, Bitcoin's died, so I need to have a look back at them. But and back in the day, KuCoin used to be decent, but then nobody uses KuCoin anymore. So, but KTS worth looking at, seeing what those charts are doing, maybe just to see whether exchange coins are of any value. But hype being obviously one of the nicest ones at the moment, breaking all-time high. I saw it drop 10% today, but I haven't looked at the chart, so I don't know if that's just a little, what's the word, little spanner in the works as opposed to a big drop or a big change in the structure. Anyway, DOT, as I said, made 3 weeks supply, so I did throw an alert in there, but it's just come down and broken the low. I did have an alert here for the possibility of swing failing that, but again, there's nothing really, you only really want a swing failure to be, firstly is if you see the structure change, as we do many times when we get swing fails of all-time highs, but swing fails of all-time lows, I think, a much, much lower probability to actually be a swing fail than the ones of all-time highs. However, I alert them just in case. But secondly, you really want to see that swing fail, not necessarily all-time low, either it be an all-time low and then see the structure change, or it be into a decent demand. And this isn't, other than a fib, there's no demand here other than DOT is going to zero. So anyway, that's not something I would look for longs at all. You can pick round numbers if you really are in love with DOT. Maybe you can pick, it did get very close to $1 there. So, if you want to buy that because it's on a round number, that's entirely up to you. That wouldn't be my preference. Solana, similar to the other larger majors, just broken that low, could be a swing failure. I did have another a little bit lower on that, but like a lot of them, it's just got this chop through here and so many zones that it could bounce on, and equivalently could just dump straight through everything if it wants. But really, for that to happen, I mean, it's not without the realms of possibility. We went up, we had a really nice distribution, we're barely getting any bounce off demand here. So for that to crash down off a cliff similar to these that we've had historically wouldn't be surprising at all. Again, the BTC pair may help in deciding whether that's going to happen now, or whether whether it's ready, or whether we are likely to get another bounce in here that maybe go into supply before that happens. And that's always the challenge here, is how much we're going to bounce. You can see over here, we came down, barely any bounce, and then dropped. This one, tried to look like it was reversing, but then dropped. That's the time that we're looking at in the equivalent of 2022 on Bitcoin. When price runs on crypto, either up or down, it becomes significantly less likely to actually give any decent retests. So if you want to short these, you're going to have to look at much lower time frames. However, again, you're shorting bottom of a range, so don't really do that there. Have a look if we come down into the 60 mark on Sol, but be a bit wary that this, is something that could just run down in a giant red candle if it wants, and certainly will if it's going to follow, if Bitcoin does that and it wants to follow. And yeah, so that's Sol, and then we've got Near. So Near was one of the ones that actually held its value. Like I said, it had moved a lot more. Near I've talked about before, the prospect of taking out these stops. We were hoping it would do it here, but it didn't, and just decided to die instead. It's one of the few, again, that went into a decent demand, did take out the low, did bounce in a decent demand. Rather annoyingly, hasn't come back for any of my re-entries on the long side. But now is in 3 monthly supply. So I've been slightly wary. I was looking at this to see if I could give a short re-entry on this. It might make a daily supply, and then I might be more inclined to look at possible shorts in here. Would prefer it to break that 3. It's also made a 3-day demand though, so I'd prefer it to break down this 3-day demand and then to look for shorts off that if they're given, because of that risk that it could go and take these trend line stops above, and because we have so many other things to short if we do want to short. That's near. And then what do we got? Atom finally, so it's the last one. Atom again. This one did make a monthly supply. As you know, we already had a monthly supply. I think I'd said in the chat in Telegram that it might flip that to monthly demand, but it didn't. It closed back below, still monthly supply. I think I had an alert here. I think I had an alert up here for a retest there, which didn't get given. Put a new alert there for a retest of this daily supply here, didn't get given. So this is why I need to go through all the majors, and I want to get rid of all these crosses from previously and just think them through again and think through what the structures are doing. Because obviously I was long biased here. We came back for a retest of this weekly, but each bounce has not led to a higher low. I then became short biased when we got this monthly supply, but obviously it's then gone up higher inside it, which can happen. And then I thought, well, maybe it would be long biased again if it flipped the monthly supply to a demand, but it hasn't done that. So it's still a very indecisive sideways type thing. And I still hate Atom in here. And maybe when I do this tomorrow, I'm going to take the opportunity to get rid of Atom out of this layout. Finally, maybe I'll put hype in. I also considered whether I should have some privacy coins in there, or even just a separate privacy layout. Or I don't know if I want too many layouts, but just so I can keep more of an eye on Zcash and then what XMR, Zen, Dash are doing. So maybe I'll make a privacy layout. We'll see. I think I have extra layouts. Now I'm pro, ultimate, platinum, whatever, trading view, very expensive, far too expensive customer. Might as well make use of what they've given me, I guess. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope they were not getting wrecked. I hope at least my high time frame analysis has prepared you for what's happening. Lower time frame has been a little harder. And then tomorrow I will really endeavour to have these charts updated and do a proper analysis of where I think bottoms might come in. And it might just be really that my indecision is due to the fact that my indecision just even on the market as a whole, but on alts, is that this I just want to break down. I just want to get out of this range, which I think is a mess, and I think it's distributive, and it's a head and shoulders, and it's all these things that we've been talking about and watching since here when we came down. I said we thought we'd get on head and shoulders. I had that drawn like that months and months and months ago, last year, but it's just taken so long. It's exhausting. So in the same way, we've had it now a year, or since February, that we've been in this range. I want this to just come down, get out of the range, or even if it goes up, it can go up if it wants. Maybe I'm wrong, that's fine. And it will hold this support. Then send it up, but at least do some decent sized candles so we can get a better judgment of where the whole market's going to go. Anyway, I hope that helps. Please, if you have any questions, I will try and do a stream tomorrow. Get on the stream and say hi. And if you've got any questions, you can put them in Telegram channel, and I'll endeavour to answer them in the stream as well. Hope that's useful, and have a good evening. Bye.